What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Occupy Fantasy. Crazy chaos in the NFL, and we're now, I guess, blessed with two-game slates, some showdown slates on Monday and Tuesday. There will not be a daily plug at occupyfantasy.com for either day. Instead, we're doing these YouTube videos to break down the slates, and we're going to start with this one tonight. It is the two-game slate: Minnesota and Chicago, Las Vegas and Cleveland. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy. Welcome. Joined by Jack, creator of dfsMagic, architect of the lineup builder at Occupy Fantasy. Jack, we recorded a very similar show Friday afternoon. Then we immediately, like literally within seconds after we finished recording, we got word that one of the Saturday games was canceled. So I'm glad to talk to you again.
Yep, and sounds like we're going to be spending a lot of time together on the video for the next couple of days, diving into these two gamers. And given the news, we might hang this video up, and more changes might happen. But right now, it does look like these games are all going to get played.
Yeah, so the games will get played, and we think we have all of the news now for injuries and COVID. We're recording this at 11 a.m. Eastern on Monday. And again, this video will only cover the Minnesota and Chicago game, the Raiders and the Browns game. We'll do a second video tomorrow, maybe a live stream so we can answer questions for tomorrow's two-game slate. So, Jack, let's jump into it. And I guess the best way to approach this is to talk about the COVID and injury situations for every single team. And what I'll do is I'll start with the team. I'll list out the absences, and you give me your thoughts on how it affects the team. How's that sound?
I'm ready.
All right, so let's start with the Raiders and the Cleveland game. And let me see here, pulling up on my side. So for the Raiders, they just have Darren Waller out due to injury. One of their cornerbacks, Trayvon Mullen, is out due to injury as well. And a kind of a sneaky activation, Jalen Richard, their running back, will be back.
Yeah, so not a whole lot going on there. We've seen Foster Moreau do well in the starting tight end role. He will get some ownership for sure. So not really a sneaky play there. And then Richard, maybe not going to get a lot of ownership in the two gamer, but it could take away the pass catching role a little bit from Josh Jacobs, which is he's been more involved in that recently. But as we'll get into, we still expect Jacobs to be very heavily owned on this slate.
Right, absolutely, for sure. And then on the Cleveland side, this is where we have all of the injuries, right? So we got news this morning that neither Baker Mayfield nor Case Keenum would test out of the protocol. They will be out. Nick Mullins will draw the start. Running back two, Kareem Hunt is out due to injury. Tight end one, Austin Hooper is out due to COVID. Tight end three, Harrison Bryant may get back with a high ankle sprain. We'll see. Jarvis Landry, their top receiver, he is out. Anthony Schwartz, very, very questionable to play. He's been kind of their rotational wide receiver throughout the year. Their right tackle is out due to COVID. Their left tackle is out due to COVID. And then they have two defensive linemen, a middle linebacker, strong safety, slot corner, all on the COVID list. So, Jack, I mean, it's just an hour or two flight to Cleveland. Maybe you or I could suit up for the Browns tonight.
Yeah, I was gonna say, have you gotten any calls? Maybe people watching our flag football games. No, I mean, it's kind of going to be a product of just who's left to even use from Cleveland. I think, we're generally going to expect pretty low ownership from Cleveland outside of a couple of the name recognition guys. Chubb, Peoples Jones, and Joku. Those latter two is sort of value jams to make lineups work. But overall, I think, just given the low point total in the game, the one that sticks out, Brian, that we probably should spend a minute on is Mullins, mainly just because of his price point on the slate.
Yeah, so he's the min price, right, on FanDuel and DraftKings, if I'm not mistaken.
I think he's 4,900 on DraftKings, so not quite min, but still, a
Yes.
couple thousand less. I'm looking at FanDuel. He is 6,500. And all the other quarterbacks are like 77, 76, 8K. So not as crazy on FanDuel, but DraftKings for sure. It's a big price drop.
Yeah, so I think you and I were talking before the show. We think he will have non-zero ownership just because people will want to play, and as we'll get to after all these injuries, all these high ownership studs. And to fit them in, they may play Mullins, which I mean, if Mullins is like 10 to 20%, that's pretty gross. If he was like 0 to 5%, I would be interested, and that just goes how thin the margin is for ownership and how good of a play it is.
Yeah, I'm with you. If it's zero owned, it's probably a good play. If it's not, I mean, it's still Nick Mullins with a like you said, they're missing offensive linemen, receivers, running backs, coaches. I mean, was he even on the practice squad or something? I forget.
I don't know. It's a good question. I think they signed him recently, and we played him a ton in preseason DFS. And the dude, I mean, he literally had more interceptions and he had 0 touchdowns in preseason DFS. And yeah, it's gonna be a rough outing for Nick Mullins tonight. So the other game, the 8 o'clock game, Minnesota and Chicago. Let's see here because we have some injuries and news for these teams as well. So on the Vikings side, Alexander Madison, their number 2 running back, has COVID. Dalvin Cook's still going to play, still dealing with that shoulder recovery, so you never know, I guess. Adam Thielen, he's listed as questionable, but he hasn't really practiced, so I doubt he plays with that high ankle sprain. Their wide receiver 3, D.D. Westbrook, is out on the COVID list. Their wide receiver 4, Dan Chisena, is on the COVID list. So, the rotational depth, while on a main slate wouldn't matter that much, Jack, but on showdown slates, especially in the 2-gamer, we have some Minnesota receivers that we need to care about.
Absolutely. I think we'll certainly see KJ Osborne get ownership as the number 2 receiver, but beyond that, the field is not going to know who that wide receiver 3 or 4 is. I mean, I don't even know right now. I need to research it, but if you can find out who those players are going to be, who's active, that could be a big advantage. 1% owned min price player that falls in the end zone or catches a 40-yard pass could even be enough on a site like this. So yeah, opens up some value, and I think you're right about Cook. He is still at risk of aggravation, but he's, as we see from his ownership, people are not playing him like that.
Right, exactly. And right now, we have the wide receiver 3 is Amir Smith-Marset, who is their rookie, looked decent in preseason, and was specifically called out by Mike Zimmer on Friday in their press conference saying he's a guy that we might need to step up. So, and he's minimum price. So Amir Smith-Marset, and he's $200 on the showdown slate too, right?
Yeah, he is. Yep.
Cool. So there you go. All right. And on the Chicago side, they're not as bad as Cleveland, but they are getting there. So let me pull it up here. Let's bring the builder back up. So for Cleveland side, or sorry, Chicago side, left tackle Jason Peters is out due to injury. Right tackle Larry Borum is out due to COVID. Not great for a young quarterback. Allen Robinson is on the COVID list. Marquise Goodwin is out due to injury. Their tight end Jesse James is on the COVID list. Their cornerback 1, their cornerback 2, their strong safety, and their free safety. So literally all 4 starters in their secondary are on the COVID list, and their defensive tackle Mario Edwards is on the COVID list. Jack is also in addition to their offensive coordinator and their special teams coach on the COVID list. They don't have many players.
And to throw in, without Mack, their 2 best defensive players, Roquan Smith, Akeem Hicks, are very injured, may not play. If they play, probably limited snaps, limited effectiveness. So yeah, they're in dire straits. But the ownership that we're going to get into doesn't necessarily reflect that as much.
Right. So let's start there. Right. So right now, what you see on screen here is our lineup builder, powered by dfsMagic, and we have the 2-game ownership available. For those of you watching us, we also have the showdown ownership for the Minnesota-Chicago game available in our model and in the builder, so go check that out for tonight. So, Jack, I have it sorted by projected ownership. Right now, we have 7 guys projected for 50% or higher roster rate on both FanDuel and DraftKings. We have Dalvin Cook, Justin Jefferson, Hunter Renfrow, Darnell Mooney, David Montgomery, Josh Jacobs, Nick Chubb. I guess first thoughts on the ownership here and these high-priced players, but then you also compared it to a previous slate where we had 5 high-owned guys on a 2-game slate. So just talk to me about the comparison and just your general thoughts on this ownership dynamic.
Yeah, Brian. So we looked last year. There was the 2-gamer with the Packers and the Bills, both heavy favorites. Very chalky name recognition players, and that slate only had 5 players over 50% ownership and only 1 over 70. Here we're projecting, like you said, 7 guys over 50 and 3, maybe even 4 over 70. And I think you should believe that this will happen. I mean, we saw yesterday, Brian, Devontae Adams was 50% owned on a main slate and 75% owned on a 3-game slate. So if that can happen, we absolutely can see these types of ownerships for these players.
Dude, it's when I saw Devontae Adams ownership, my mind was literally blown to see him 50+% on the main slate. That was just absolutely nuts. So, and so we've read around the industry, we've talked to different people, and Jack, there's a consensus by the field and by people we've talked to that basically what people are going to do is play some uncorrelated lineups tonight and jam these Minnesota studs in Dalvin Cook, Justin Jefferson, but not necessarily play them with Kirk Cousins, but play them with likely Justin Fields, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's really surprising, Brian. I mean, normally on a short slate, it's sort of easier for the field to identify, kind of who's going to score the most points, right? That makes sense. But like you said, Kirk Cousins is a guy that never gets a lot of ownership because of the stud, Jefferson and Cook on his team. But Fields had a big game. People get intrigued by the idea of playing the min-price quarterback in Mullins, and it's kind of hard to uh, understand the reasons we're seeing it. But like you said, we through talking to people and researching websites, that really does appear to be where the field's going tonight.
All right, so for tournaments, what are you thinking, Jack? So my first thought is being crazy. Let's play this other game heavily, this Browns and Raiders game. And I guess before we actually get directly into that, we should talk about lineup construction for 2 game slates. You've had a big cash on 2 game slates, a lot of success on 2 game slates, and we know that there is leverage in playing one game really heavily in your lineup. And I was doing some research for the past 10 short slates and just looking at what works in small field contests, and there's a lot of overlap between what works in small field versus what works in large field. And basically, what you want to have is at least 3, but probably 4 players from one team, including the quarterback. At least 1, but probably 2, up to 3 players from the opposing team, and at least 1 player below 20% in every lineup. Which should be pretty easy tonight, given that everybody's above 20%. So easy to get different there. So Jack, we're looking at mega game stacks, 1 to 3, maybe 4 low-owned pieces. So with that in mind, what are you thinking for tonight?
Yeah, you hit it on the head. I mean, find a game and stack it in each lineup. If you're playing multiple lineups, certainly you can have some lineups that go for one game and some that go for the other. And again, we'll get back to this quarterback dynamic where the favored higher team total teams are the Vikings and the Raiders, but we're seeing a lot of the buzz for quarterbacks for the other two, for Fields and Mullins. So, that doesn't mean Fields and Mullins are going to be the 2 highest owned quarterbacks on the slate, but it does mean they're going to get a lot more ownership than they probably should. If you again look back to that Buffalo game, Green Bay game, 2 game slate, Josh Allen and Aaron Rodgers just totally monopolized the ownership. And that's sort of what you would expect to see here, but you're just not. So I think, playing Derek Carr and Kirk Cousins game stacks at ownership lower than they should be is a great place to start.
And the other interesting aspect of that is, while Justin Fields and Nick Mullins won't be incredibly popular, basically every lineup that starts with one of those 2 quarterbacks will look pretty much the same. And you're actually getting different by paying up and playing Cousins or Carr. And so not only are you having a little bit of a differentiated lineup construction, you're also just naturally getting in more lower owned players because the field's not going to build that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of gets back to the point you made at the beginning about, we have 7 guys projected for over 50%, which means a lot of lineups are going to look very similar. And just kind of think about what happens when, 3 of those guys fail. You probably want to build in a way where you still have some live entries. I mean, you can't fade those guys entirely, but like you said, what if Dalvin Cook falls on his shoulder? It gets nicked up. It's 17-0. They're just like, you know what? We're not going to chance it. What if the Bears totally fail because of all these injuries and the coaches are not there, and Montgomery, Mooney, 60+% owned guys score almost zero. You kind of just got to think about what happens when those really chalky players fail, and then how can you build lineups to have a shot at a big win. And again, it depends, right, Brian, on contest size, how many people you're trying to beat. In a small contest, you probably don't have to get that super crazy.
Right. So you and I were talking, I think it was earlier in the week, about the Thanksgiving slate, right? Remember Montgomery and Swift were both like 60% plus, and that was a 3 game slate. So pretty crazy ownership for a 3 game slate. And you and I both felt that it's pretty tough to get away from those guys, but they both failed immediately. And even if you try to match the field in your lineups, you're still drawn pretty much dead just because of what happens if they fail. So that's always something interesting to think about. And when we have 7 guys with that kind of ownership, I'm just trying to think to myself, how many of these guys should I have in one lineup if I want to avoid like mass duplication?
Yeah, I think we had kind of penciled in our heads, maybe 2 to 3 kind of range. Just kind of have to eyeball it. Another way you could do it is kind of try to only play them getting back to the game stack idea, like, Jacobs and Chubb, like maybe, have some lineups where they're both in there and then have some lineups where neither one is in there. Same idea with some of the chalkier Vikings and Bears players. But yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I think like you said, as long as you stick to at least one lower owned player in there and paint up for those quarterbacks, I think that's a great way to get unique tonight.
Yeah, so speaking of those lower owned players, I just filtered the builder here on screen. Players projected for 20% or less ownership. Who are you leaning towards as some of these uh, uh, some of the main guys you're building around for these lower owned players that can help you get different?
Yeah, I think, one that sticks out to me is Osborne. I think in a showdown slate we're going to see him get some ownership, but because the Cleveland game's at 5 and Thielen has not been officially ruled out, we've seen a lot of the other sites are still projecting him. I just feel like people are not going to go out of their way to play Osborne. So, he's a guy that's going to get a ton of looks in a great spot against, like you said, a team missing their entire secondary. And I think he's a good one. I think maybe some of the Raiders, Deshaun Jackson, Zay Jones kind of guys. I bet you're all about those. I see we have Zay Jones as an underperforming receiver this week. Certainly against a decimated defense, one of those guys could get over the top for a long touchdown.
Yeah, my bankroll will tell you that Zay Jones has been underperforming for the last month, so, certainly know all about that. Um, yeah, I agree. I mean, all these guys. I mean, tons of Raiders passing game, which is kind of crazy considering Cleveland's missing most of their secondary, right? You can play a lot of these Raiders pass. I mean, all the receivers except Renfro, Zay Jones, Deshaun Jackson, Brian Edwards, who don't have huge target shares, but again, all it takes is one on a short slate like this. So, I have one more question for you. Let me think if I can. Oh, late swap. You mentioned the KJ Osborne thing, right? So we may not get news. We think Thielen's out, but every time we bring you on, we got to talk about late swap because a lot of your big wins have been a result of late swap. So any particular thoughts for tonight's slate on the first game ends, and we know the first game might not even end before the second game starts, so that makes it a little tricky. But just any thoughts on late swapping tonight and how important it is?
Yeah, it's always a huge thing. We don't get that many chances to do it in NFL because the games are usually played at the same time. So just recommend for folks to be around, even if it's just on your phone. And generally what you want to do is look at your best performing lineups that have the most minutes remaining, and kind of look and see how many people ahead of you have either a better lineup with the same minutes remaining, or people immediately behind you with more minutes, and you kind of get a feel for like, okay, am I looking like I'm going to win or do really well or not, and then you can choose to play higher or lower owned players, or leave some more salary on the table um, to try to differentiate.
Yeah, I mean, all great points, all great points, all very important, and that's pretty good. Specific strategies on how to handle late swaps. And Jack, before we get out of here, I did want to talk to you about the showdown slate. We do have ownership up in the model for Minnesota and Chicago, and I just want to talk to you about because you think that there's a pretty decent angle and maybe an edge to play tonight based on mostly what I mean. It kind of correlates with what we talked about in the two-game slate, but the Fields versus Kirk Cousins dynamic.
Yeah, Brian. I mean, what did we see from Kansas City Chargers? That was shocking. Do you remember what the numbers were?
Mahomes got down to what 20 something percent MVP right on FanDuel.
Yeah, like yeah, 25% MVP. Just think about that. Like we haven't seen that. I don't know when we've seen that. Maybe like the first time he ever played.
Yeah.
Um, so like, and we saw it on DraftKings too. Justin Herbert was like 15 some 20% captain, like 75% overall. And just again, that buzz that we were talking about from the other sites and talking to people with this two gamer is going to carry over to Showdown. People are going to play Fields. On Showdown, he's cheaper than Cousins. He's sounds like he's projected just as high or maybe even higher than Kirk. So, people are why would you play Kirk, right? But the effect of that is you're going to get the favored quarterback in a smash spot against a decimated defense at pretty low um, captain MVP and flex ownership. And I honestly, normally Minnesota slates are pretty tough to play, Brian, but I think tonight it's a unique situation to try to just jam Cousins in there.
It really is because Thielen being out certainly helps it too. Because and even the rotational receivers being out certainly helps because we get Osborne and some of these other guys, and no Madison, so a very cheap running back too, whether that's Gallman or Nwangu. So, lots of ways to play it. But Kirk Cousins in the passing game, and again, if you just think of this goes to show having context in DFS, right? It's even in a sport like NFL, right, where most lineups are projections heavy. A lot of people are listening and using projections, but just using some context like defensive injuries and defensive absences are very important. And with that being said, Kirk Cousins in the passing game is an easy play despite the ownership saying otherwise. So, Jack, any final thoughts on tonight, either one of the games or any strategies?
Just I'm really hoping we don't lose to 20% owned Nick Mullins, But I think we would take the situation every time, right? And we jam in these lower owned quarterbacks in the smash spot and just deal with the results.
Absolutely. So that'll do it for this video. Appreciate you all listening. Again, there is no daily plug for Monday or Tuesday, these 2 game slates. Very special case. So again, we're doing these videos. This video here for today. We'll do another video, maybe a live stream tomorrow for tomorrow's 2 game slate. The Occupy model is up. Rankings, FanDuel, DraftKings, Yahoo with projected ownership. The builder, what you see on screen here, is the handiwork of Jack at dfsMagic. That is always up and running for every single slate, FanDuel and DraftKings with projected ownership. Be sure to check it out. OccupyFantasy.com/lineup builder is how you can get access to that. For YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the channel to get notified when we go live or upload any new videos. A lot of changing content schedules here with the COVID situations going on. So being subscribed to the channel just gets you up to date on everything, and also being a follower of us on Twitter at Occupy Fantasy gets you notified of all the content changes. Give us a thumbs up if you like the video, and any questions, comment on the video, or just hop in Discord, talk to Jack, I, and other members of the OccupyFantasy.com community. So for Jack at DFS_Magic_, I'm Brian at Brian Jester FF. Appreciate you listening. Good luck and enjoy some weekday football.